Me, ooh, 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 and I'm feeling good. Fish in the sea, you know how I feel. River running free, you know how I feel. Blossom on the tree, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me, and I'm feeling good. Dragonfly out in the sun, you know what I mean, don't you know? Butterflies all having fun, you know what I mean. Sleep in peace when day is done, that's what I mean. And this old world is a new world and a bold world for me. Yeah, yeah. Stars, when you shine, you know how I feel. Scent of the pine, you know how I feel. Oh, freedom is mine, and I know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me.
You're gonna get your wish. Everybody, we're gonna get started. Hey everybody, good morning. Welcome to Redeemer. This in our 10 o'clock time out here under the beloved tent, we are doing a series called "This Is Redeemer," and what we're hoping to do during this time is for us as a community to just understand together what we're about, what we care about, what life at Redeemer is. So if you might have a handout already, a bulletin for the worship service at 11, you might not. Is it okay if I bring this closer to my face, John? Okay. And I like to be able to hit my nose on it. And on the back of our bulletins for worship is our mission statement of our church, which is that Redeemer Church is a worshiping community that exist to be transformed by God's grace into faithful servants of all. And what we're doing during these This is Redeemer sessions is really just sort of exploring what that mission statement means for us. And so last week we looked at worship, that we are a worshiping community. And so we talked about worship, why we do it, what it's all about. I want to, before we jump into community, just hear as you maybe reflected on last week, what was said, if any questions may have come to you or things you wanted clarified or thoughts that you had from last week if you were here last week. Any thoughts, questions from last week? I will do this until there's at least one thought or question, so. It was great, says Ellis. Thank you, Ellis. So encouraging. That doesn't count. But very encouraging. That's Ellis, just an encourager. Also, Ellis is about running the city of Winston-Salem at this point. If you want to get in places in Winston-Salem, talk to Ellis. Any thoughts or questions from last week about worship? Ma'am? Who's Ellis? Ellis, put your hand up. This is Ellis Kiefer. She works for Greater Winston-Salem in new business recruitment. She also previously worked for RUF at Wake Forest and lives across the street, literally. So she's real close to Redeemer physically. All right, cool. Well, it's always good to know that everything you said was absolutely abundantly crystal clear. Thank you, Claire. All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about community. That Redeemer is a worshiping community. A church is both an organization, something that exists as an institution. The church has existed for thousands of years, and both as a church around the world and throughout time, and as individual churches. And churches all kind of do the same thing. We worship, we spend time together. But also a church is an organism. It's a community. It's a living and active group of people. And last week I was talking about the church as kind of like Hogwarts from Harry Potter. Everyone there is a wizard. It's a safe respite for wizards, but it's also a training ground for wizards. And really, I want to continue that example. If the church is like Hogwarts, it's this safe place for wizards to come in and to learn how to do magic so they can go out into the world and be magical. So it's a place of support. Like the church is a place to support you, that you can be supported, that you can rest, that you can find your place. But the church is also a place that pushes you to be the best version of yourself. If you spend all of your time within a church and after a number of years you still kind of operate exactly the same way, then something is going wrong. That your life in the church community is supposed to be transformative. So the church is both a family, but it's in some ways more than a family, because your family, the people in your family, they can just act however they want, and you have no choice, but they just are your family, right? And family is often a place of low transformation, but high belonging. And the church, we want to be a place of high belonging and high transformation. So we're also like a team, that we work together and we spur one another on. There's all this language in the Bible for what the church community is. One is that it's like a body of Jesus. He's the head, and we're all the different members of the body. So there's that belonging, like we all are bound to one another forever. But there's also a sense of like the kneecap just can't just go do whatever. Well, that's the elbow. The kneecap just can't just go do whatever the kneecap wants to do. It works together for the good of the whole. There's another image that in the scripture that the church is like these living stones that are built together into a temple for God. So we all belong together to the same structure, but we all also depend on one another and need to be able to count on one another. And that sense of belonging and purpose or accountability is what it means to be part of the Redeemer community. In the early days, the ancient church, no one knew what was going on. They just knew that the Christians were like this offshoot of Judaism, but all these weird things got said about them. One is people thought that Christians were incestuous, that they were involved in incest, because everyone called each other brother and sister, but some of them were married, right? The sense of belonging to a family together is something that's really kind of unique to the church. So we're on a mission together, and we need each other's best, but also this is also a place for you to belong. So part of what that means is that your primary relationship in the church is not to the pastor. Your primary reason for being in the church is not to receive stuff from the pastor. It's not to receive sermons. We are used to going to places and receiving goods and services from them. So sometimes we come to a church and we say, well, I didn't like what the pastor was saying, didn't like the sermons, or I didn't like the music, or I didn't like the children's ministry, or whatever, and so this church isn't for me. That pretty much defines the church as the preacher or the pastor, or what the church is able to give you in terms of spiritual services. But the church is a community in which we belong to each other. So the primary relationship that you will have in the Redeemer community is with one another. That we belong to one another, and we each have roles that we fulfill within this community. We give and receive care from one another. And that this is a place for you and for your family to belong and to give your best. Okay, so that all probably sounds well enough. It sounds good. I don't know, maybe it sounds bad. But probably sounds okay so far. The question for us is, okay, so what do I have to do as a member of the community to make sure that Redeemer is a beautiful community? To make sure that Redeemer is what we would consider a gospel-centered community. And I just want to tell you this. Every place that you go to has a culture. I don't know if you shop at Trader Joe's, but I frequent all the grocery stores and love them all for each of their unique gifts. Harris Teeter, I feel like I'm at home in there. Food Line, I feel like I'm really with my neighborhood in Food Line because it's right over here. Trader Joe's, and this isn't a statement about whether you should shop at Trader Joe's, but I always feel better about life when I leave Trader Joe's. Amen. I got amens. Amy's giving the amen, and lots of vegan-friendly foods there. There is something about the culture of Trader Joe's that when you go in there, they're committed to maintaining a culture that you feel a certain way and you have a certain kind of experience when you go into that space. That doesn't just happen. Because the people that work at Harris Teeter are really nice. The people that work at Food Lion are really nice. I can't speak for anyone that works at Publix or Lowe's because I don't go there. But everyone's really nice. But that happens as a result of saying we want to take care of the culture of this place, that we are aware of the kind of culture that we want to be. That's what results in having that experience. So you could think about the culture of our community at Redeemer as a gospel culture. Gospel meaning the good news of Jesus. That what we believe we have received from Jesus is how we operate with one another. So here's some of what that means for us. We want the Redeemer community to be a place where we do not hide the gospel. Meaning, we want the gospel that God himself has come into the world to give us new life, to rescue us, and to give us to one another. We want that to be obvious to everyone in our community, and for it to be comprehensible to everyone in our community. So that means that in our culture, we can't use consistent insider lingo. We can't just say, well, that's just a Redeemer thing. Because the vast majority of people in the room might not understand what a Redeemer thing is. There are many, there's a lot of lingo or customs or habits or behaviors or rituals within the church which happen, and they're good and beautiful, and we can keep them, but we have to make sure that we give people a way to enter into them, that we don't hide the gospel. Because we're a gospel community, We want Redeemer to be a place where hurting people are welcomed and cared for and shown the gospel, where people of all kinds have the space and time to process the gospel and faith and life with God. Meaning that the more unfamiliar someone is with God and with faith, the longer that process is going to take, and that we actually embrace that together. That means that our life together in our community, if any kind of person from Winston can come here and be part of this community, that means that our life together will likely be a long and messy process of discovering God and walking with Him together. Now, creating a culture where the gospel is front and center and we're aware of the things that we do and we're not hiding the gospel is really, really, really counterintuitive. Because most of us, without thinking about it, come to church to get something that we've already had before. Nostalgia is usually what drives us in church. Most of us don't want to create a culture of the gospel, but to recreate a culture that we have received in the past that was meaningful to us or that worked for us. I had something written down here. We have to remember what is sacred to us as a community. And that's that our identity in Jesus and what God is doing with us is what's sacred. What God has done in the past, or the ways that we've sensed that God was at work, are not what is sacred to us. So in our community, we're always open-handed. There's this rose bush, and a lot of you guys are gardeners. Rebecca's a gardener, I know that. Rebecca does many things well, amazingly. And we have a rose bush that we planted last year in our yard. And for that rose bush to flourish, it has to be often pruned. What was there has to be cut back. And it's painful for the plant. It seems kind of painful for the plant. It's going to be painful for our community. But the new buds love it. There are always tons, like John Engel can talk about rose bushes all day long. We enter into making this space uncomfortable for us so that new life can bloom in our community. This community exists for new life for our people in our church and the people within our city. But we just have to acknowledge that based on how long we've been here or what kind of experience we've had in church, that experience is going to feel differently for us. For some of us, it's going to feel painful. It's going to feel like loss at times. For some of us, it's going to feel exciting. And then we'll probably trade places at some point. My wife always talks about this, like folding in a piece of paper. And she's like, the goal is to fold in the edges, right? So if you think about this tent even, there's folks that are always on the fringe or on the edge, and they're not sure how to get into what's happening in a community. And if you're a gospel community, your job is to actually fold those edges in to the middle so they can experience the middle. But as we fold the edge in, what happens, I'm just going to tell you how this feels, is that you used to feel like you were central. And suddenly you feel like the edge. Does that make sense? And that's why we continue to keep folding the edges in to invite into the life of the church. The church, y'all, can be a really, 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 really hard place to belong to because it requires us to be somewhat counterintuitive. So some of the other ways that we create a gospel culture is that we never stop talking about the gospel. We never stop talking about how God has moved toward us to give us new life. When I was in RUF at Appalachian, the thing that we said every week was that you're never so bad that you're beyond the reach of God's grace, but you're never so good that you're beyond the need of God's grace. And that was a constant reminder that everyone in the room came to receive God's grace. The gospel confronts each of us, convicts us, converts us, comforts us. So part of what that looks like for us is for us to remember what it's like to not believe. To remember what it's like to come into a community and a lot of its ways of doing life are really strange. And they require us to learn People gathering and singing songs about someone's blood getting splashed on them is really weird. Like, just acknowledge how strange that is. Like, if you, I just remember this on campus all the time. Like, we're in a dimly lit room, and people are looking at a screen and singing happily about someone's blood getting splashed on them and how precious it is. You know, like, that's just a really odd thing to be doing. And in understanding its oddness and weirdness, we actually find the mystery, and we actually allow folks to kind of step into that. So just being aware of who's around you and not assuming that they know what's going on here. Not assuming that they know how to get involved in what this community is. I really want something like our Sunday morning worship services to be the perfect place for you to invite someone into that you have no idea what they think about God. Like, I have no idea what this person believes or how they're living or whatever, but I know I can invite them to Redeemer, and it's going to be a perfect place for them to wrestle, to process, to meet people, and to be connected, to not be lonely. Yeah. So we want. Let's see. What I really like, a promise that I want to make to you as one of your pastors is, like, if you want to invite someone into this community, and, like, let's say you invite them to church, it's on me to make sure that you don't look bad for doing that. Does that make sense? You're like, hey, come with me to church. It's on me as the person in the front to not make you look like a crazy person for inviting them to church. Like, what we want is for folks to come and be like, that's like what they were saying was exactly like, I'm really resonating with that. Or those are questions that I've been asking. Or that person talking from the front seemed like they really expected someone like me to be there. Like, that is the promise that I'm making to you. And as a community, if you're part of the Redeemer community, that is also the promise that you're making to each other. That if someone brings their friend into this community, that they can count on each other to welcome them, pursue them, and to see them. Redeemer was planted in the early 80s. And so we've been around for 40 years. And that church plant mentality of looking for everyone and finding them and connecting with them, it requires being refreshed over and over again. So my job is to protect you if you invite your friend. Your job is to protect each other if someone else invites their friend. Yeah, and we want Redeemer to be a community. If you think about what Winston-Salem is, if you think about Winston-Salem as like a pie chart of all different kinds of people and all different kinds of demographics, where people live, what they do for a living, what their interests are, what their background is. Are they longtime Winston-Salem people? Did they come to town? Did they work in the medical thing? Did they work for Wake Forest? Did they work for School of the Arts? Did they work for Trader Joe's? All these kinds of people. We want Redeemer to be a community that reflects the entire pie, like a small version of the entire pie of Winston-Salem. Any kind of person, we want them to feel like they can belong at Redeemer. The only people that I'm comfortable feeling really uncomfortable in the Redeemer community are longtime professing Christians that don't want to serve. If you're like, I've been walking with Jesus for a long time, but I just want to get the thing that I want and leave, then, like, actually, hopefully, Redeemer might feel a little bit uncomfortable for you. Because you'll feel like, I don't feel like I'm really in here unless I'm part of this vital life and serving together as a church. Yeah, and last thing is this. I'm hoping that we will think of our community here at Redeemer like a laboratory for the kingdom. So, like, if these things are true, that God loves us, He's making us new, He's giving us this new life together, that this is a laboratory where you can experiment on making that happen. This is a place where you can experiment with forgiveness. This is a place where you can experiment with serving. Or it's like a sandbox, a place that you can get in, and each person can be in the sandbox building their own stuff and being creative in the space. So some of the ways that you can pursue community at Redeemer, and then I'm going to take questions. We have small groups. We're actually about to go through a pretty significant change in how we format our small groups. But small groups gather once or twice a month, sometimes every week in someone's home to enjoy one another and to pray with one another and to just do life together. If you want to be in a small group, you can look on our website and we will. You can register for one. What we're going to do in January is that all of our current Redeemer small groups will end the season of their existence. You can keep meeting with your small group if you want to keep that group together and you want to have like a dinner club. That's great. But if you sign up for a small group at Redeemer, we are going to take all the signups, and then we're just going to put people in different groups for 1 year. That you can enjoy that group and get to know each other, and then at the end of that year, that group will cease to exist, and then we'll sign up for new groups. That's how we're going to do small groups in the future. But for now, we're continuing to meet in the way our small groups have. You can sign up for those. We're studying a book called Gentle and Lowly. You can get a copy this morning and take it home for free. You can serve at Redeemer. What's going to happen on the last Sunday of this month in the 10 o'clock time is you're going to have an opportunity to sign up for a way that you can serve here at Redeemer and belong to the life of Redeemer, because you're going to love the community here more if you're able to serve in it. We have women's Bible study. What are some of the other ways that people can get connected with the community of Redeemer? Just speak them out. Peter, Lindy, you know of a good one. For athletic men, softball. We have a softball team. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Talk to Peter. All right. Questions about anything that you want to ask about at all about church? Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Because when you're putting new people together,
Mm-hmm.
in my experience and opinion,
Yeah.
it takes longer than a year to really build community.
Totally.
And so if every year you're changing,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the intention or
Yeah.
to do it for 1 year. What resonates
Mm-hmm.
is I might know a lot of people a little bit,
Right.
but I won't really have the opportunity to get to know people.
Sure. Yeah, so Bev's question, it's a good point, is that if you're going to be in a small group for only a year, it takes longer than a year to build deep relationships. People realize this when they go to college and they are thinking, oh, in the first month I'm going to have like close friends, and they didn't realize that the friends that they already had, they had spent the last 12 years making slowly over time, and that's how they got to be close. So it's hard to make a deep relationship after only 1 year. And that is the downside of doing it that way. And the upside is that more people get connected to each other. I would say that you can continue to develop those relationships. It just won't be the official way that we're doing small groups. And that just really, really, really try to make that 1 year really count. But yeah, I mean, what we have a lot of small groups in our church. Part of what's beautiful about it is they've been a small group for like 20 years. And that's really amazing. It's hard for folks to break into that world. When I came to Redeemer as an outsider, I've seen lots of pockets of people that are close with each other, and they don't really relate to each other super well. And so part of what we're doing is just trying to mix up that. Like, we have the ingredients in the bowl, and I just really want to mix them up more. But it may be a colossal failure, and then we will revisit. And I'm okay with that. Because I think that the resurrection is real, so we're probably going to be okay, But yeah, that's a real concern. Yeah. Other thoughts? Amy? Yep. So we have this thing. Thank you, Amy. So what Amy's pointing, Amy is our membership director. If you're looking to know how to be a member at Redeemer, that's your person right there to talk to, and she knows it all. It brings up a couple of things. One is whether you're a member or not at Redeemer, we use this thing called Realm, which is like an online directory, because you're like, gosh, that person, I met them. I really wish I had like gotten their email address so that I could get on the softball team, but I don't know Peter's email address. And you can just log into Realm and be like, oh, there's Peter's email address. I'll email him. It's really handy and super helpful. Also, we compile all your social security numbers, and you don't have to worry about giving. We'll just take care of that. I'm just kidding. But that's really helpful to us, and that's for whether you're a member or not. Now, membership in a church is different than just like showing up at church. Becoming a member of a church is kind of like marrying a church. You take vows to it, that I don't just peace out whenever I want. I don't just do whatever I want. I'll support the church. I'll receive blessing from the church, all these things. And so if you're interested in joining a church and really, I think, taking advantage of all that a church community has to offer, and I would love to talk to you about that. And you could talk to Amy. All right, other questions about anything church-related? Yes, sir. Gentleman in the blue, I'm not sure your name. Great question. You're a lawyer, so I'm not 100% sure what you want me to do with this question, but I feel like I'm about to lose. Rich's question was, is the church primarily the pastor? Is it the institution? Is it the community? The church is the visible manifestation of God's work and God's people on the earth. It's the way that God is at work. So it is an institution and it is a people. It is not a pastor. Like the hardest thing for us in our community, in our world, is to come to something and not think, I'm supposed to be receiving a good. I paid my money. Now you're supposed to give me what I want. That is how we do everything else in our lives, and the church just does not function well at all. One time I was with Rich, by the way, and someone was saying that they were thinking about not sticking around because they didn't like the preaching. And Rich was great. He was like, well, if the church is the preacher, then your decision is really easy. Go to another place. If it's more than that, then your decision is really complex. And I was like, man, that was a really good answer from Rich. So it's all those things. What did you want to say with that question, Rich?
No further
No.
questions.
Oh, wow. The prosecution rests. I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night thinking about that, Rich. Like all that seminary, and what was it for? Couldn't answer Rich's question. Yes, sir. Mr. Wagner.
One of the nice features of the realm is you can search by first name.
Ah.
If you want to know
Yes. That's so one of the nice features, says Tim, is that you can search realm by first name. And so if you want to know who Rich is, there aren't a lot of Riches. There is at least one other Rich that I know of. But you can be like, it was that Rich at the blue shirt. Yeah, you can use realm that way. I would say, here's an example. And I'm the pastor, so my examples are pastory. But like, I was thinking about this last night, and I was talking to Sarah Jane, who was a pastor's kid and now is a pastor's wife, and so she's seen it all, friends. But I was telling her, I said, like, a good example of being a gospel community, when it comes to the preacher, I'm like, what I wish that what would happen after preaching is that no one would say that they thought that it was good. Like, thanks, that was good. So that would be like no feedback of that sort. And also people wouldn't go to other people and say, that stunk and I hated it and made me mad. They also wouldn't do that. Actually what people would do was, if they came up to me, they would say, your sermon made me think about this. And if they went to someone else, they would say, that sermon made me think about this. And then you're having an expansive conversation about what you both received together instead of treating it like a commodity that you're evaluating. So, I don't know if does that sound intense? I keep being afraid that I'm sounding angry. I'm not angry. Okay. Other questions? Yes. Yes, sir.
Chris, your talk so far has made me think about this. No, I don't quite have my question formulated, but
Sure.
I feel like anxious enough about it that I want to share it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe other people feel this, I don't know. When I invite people in, I want to invite them into something that I am feeling blessed by, like, and I believe that like a beautiful community is the most inviting thing there is.
Yeah.
And so if I'm struggling to be experiencing that here, is serving more the answer? Is
Right.
understanding grace more, or is it inviting more people in? Like,
Sure.
how do I make sure that maybe this
Yeah.
is selfish, but how do I feel healthy and like feel like we are healthy?
Yeah. So part of what Matt's question is, you want to invite someone into something, into a community that you're feeling blessed and like you belong to. And if you're struggling to feel that, like in the Redeemer community, what's the best thing to do? Is it just to serve? Is it to think about grace more? Neither of those is a problem, I would say. I actually think that the community becomes more and more beautiful the more that we live like it's already beautiful. So when I often meet people and I'm like very afraid to invite them to church, right? Because we're just a strange bunch sometimes for people that aren't used to all this stuff. But I'm also like, our community would be even more awesome and beautiful if you were in it. And so I'm just going to invite you into it and just and trust that it's already there. There's a sense of like this tension that we live in the kingdom that like everything that we have in Jesus already exists and it's also yet to come. And I think this part of me is this why I want to do this class with you is I want to give you a reason to really try your best within this community to be the kind of place that you would want to be received into, so that question becomes somewhat irrelevant. Like I said last week, the faith is a deposit that we receive from those that came before us, and we guard it, and then we pass it on. Guarding it means guarding our culture at Redeemer, that when people come in, they just experience profound and deep welcome here. In some ways, it's like if you go to Trader Joe's, and then when you leave, you feel better than when you came. Not because we just want people to feel better. We want people to encounter God. And like you're the first line for that. Yeah. I don't know if I really answered your question. I feel like I sidestepped it a little bit. But yes. Yes, Robbie.
Kind of springboarding off of what Rich's question was about like the church being a church, an institution, or a pastor. If pastors are put in place to care for and shepherd the congregation, who cares for and shepherds pastors? And like I think a lot of us think in a very hierarchical way,
Right.
like a company structure or something like that. It seems like oftentimes the pastor is placed at the head.
Yeah.
Can you explain or deconstruct that, or if that's a wrong view
Sure.
of the church? And if it's a wrong view or a right view, who cares for pastors?
Right. Good question. All right. So I'm glad you asked it. So Robbie's question was, if in the church pastors exist to shepherd and care for the congregation, who takes care of the pastors? And a lot of you guys have asked this, especially in the last month, and that makes a lot of sense. So there are different ways of doing church structure. This is going to be a 30-second explanation of how every church on the planet is structured, okay? There's 3 ways you can do it. You can do it by the congregation. The congregation makes all the decisions together. You get together, you vote on the color of the carpet, you vote on who's going to be the pastor, you do it as a group. It's like 100% democracy at church, okay? You can do what's called an Episcopal style or a bishop-based style, where it's like a pyramid, you know? You got the Pope, you got archbishops, you got bishops, and they're in charge of the various churches, right? And so the person that cares for them is the person that's above them, right? We're what's called Presbyterian, which means run by elders. The word presbyteros means elder in Greek, and that means that we have elders in our church. So our church, from within the community, nominates and elects men to serve as elders of the church. And it's their job with the pastors, who are also elders, to shepherd the congregation together. So it is actually the goal of that group of people to care for one another and to watch out for one another. If that makes sense, okay? So you have three kinds of church government: congregational, Episcopalian, Presbyterian. We're Presbyterian. So Rich that asked the question, Rich is one of our elders. We're the same kind of thing. We have different roles within the church. It doesn't always work great, because also that group of people can fire you. So it's a little complex. But we care for one another and submit to one another and receive care from one another when it's working well. But that, again, requires each of us to show up and give our best to that. Yeah. Yep.
Is it a wrong way to view pastors? And I heard like what Justin said last time.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever Giorgio comes back, like Giorgio is not just at the helm, the CEO, like full steam ahead. But in some ways, like he is that, but he's not that, based on what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And Justin said, like, don't orient yourself to Giorgio whenever he comes back. Like, great help has come back. Like, how do we orient to pastors? And I think you touched on that a little bit last week.
Mm-hmm.
But still, as you think about just what happens in a church for those who aren't pastors or new to church specifically, like, if I'm new to Redeemer, how do I think about it? What should your...
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the pastors have gotten a unique call from God to lead us into worship and to equip us as a group to go out and to do the work of ministry together. In some sense, pastors, I think, function best when they're supposed to be treated like wizards. So if you've ever read The Lord of the Rings or seen the movies, all the people in the fellowship all have different gifts and ways that they can do things, whether they're a dwarf or a human or an elf or a wizard. The wizard's the only one that casts spells. So we're we need a Gandalf to cast a spell here, and then otherwise we're still going on with our life together. I don't know if that seems weird. I'm getting a lot of funny looks in response to that. But the pastor is there to lead us into worship and, in a sense, bring God's word to us, bring the sacraments to us, and to prepare us for life outside of this church. So the pastor doesn't have all the answers. The pastor is just part of that fellowship that has been equipped and called in a certain way. It's easy to either make too much or too little of what that person is supposed to be doing. But Giorgio or me doesn't do ministry to you. We help bring our community into God's presence for worship, so that we can be equipped and sent out into the world to do the things that God has called each of us to do. So that was why I was making that comment about comments after the preaching. By the way, that was a really funny joke. But is because to say this is what I thought of from that is to orient to it I'm receiving something from here that's a gift, instead of I'm receiving something that I evaluate. If that makes sense.
Being fed in that way.
Right. Yeah, that's my job. Yeah, Morgan. Yeah, that's a great question. Right. Yeah. So we have elders in our church, and that's a group of men. That's just we can talk about that later. But our session has long felt even though we do believe Scripture says that those people should be men, that we're really missing out on the full wisdom that our church can bring to bear because our sisters aren't part of the conversation. And so our session decided to appoint certain women from within our congregation to a council of women that will serve alongside our session and be part of all the conversations and everything that we do as a session. And so we've been working through that training process, Morgan, And so if you're part of Redeemer, you just got an email on Friday announcing 2 new elder candidates and a third that's on the way. If you look at the email, so Josh Benoit and Rob Painter are going to be before you to vote on at the beginning of October. Also, Tim Carper will be before you at some point, but he's currently a pastor, and so he has to go through a little bit more stuff. But after that, our session will announce, these are the women that the session has appointed to serve alongside the session as this councilwoman, so that our session isn't doing the work of leading the church just with men only in the conversation. So look for those women to be announced in October, Morgan. All right, maybe one more. People are starting to arrive. They're like, I didn't come for this. David. Step into the tent, David. Yeah. There's not, but I really like that idea. So something that Giorgio really cares about, and I think it's great, is what's called cohorts or different orders. I just say like, hey, within the church, if you're in the medical world, let's form a cohort together to know how to support and love and encourage each other well in that. That's something that I would love to see more. That's sort of Giorgio's wheelhouse, so when he gets back, if that's something that he wants to take up, then I'll leave that to him. Okay, thank you guys so much for being here. This is okay, cool. So this is Heather. Heather, stand up and be recognized. Heather Bolt-Michael. Give it up for Heather. So in the last month, in the last year, we've gone from the only people in the building were me, Giorgio, and John Ray for a long time, streaming the worship service. It was a little lonely, but I liked the company that we had. To gathering together again, to meeting in this way. And it takes a lot to make Sunday morning happen. And at first, it was kind of like me and Susan and Hella, just trying to do it all. And since we've wanted to do more, Heather has come on as a volunteer to coordinate all kinds of different people that serve on Sunday mornings, whether it's prepping the communion stuff, setting up the food, helping set up the tech, all that stuff. So she's passing around a clipboard, and she would love to get folks scheduled to help set up and tear down for stuff for church for the next few Sundays. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Anything you want to add?
Just respond and read your email.
Just respond and read your email, she said. Coming up at the end of the month, this is just a foretaste of all the different ways you'll be able to serve at Redeemer, which will be rolling out to you. Okay, love you guys. We'll gather in 5 minutes for worship.